Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mark Moss Show, where, of course, we're always talking about the decentralized revolution, the way the world is changing. And, of course, yes, we look at it through the lenses of politics, finance, and technology. It's the convergence of those three things that give us context to what the heck's going on, because it seems very, very crazy. Now, it is crazy. And I want to bring to you some of the latest breaking news so you know what's going on and explain it to you so you can start to see how this fits into this great narrative. Now, if you've been paying attention to the news for the last couple of days, I'm sure you've seen it, and it's a pretty troubling sign. It's been bothering me. I saw a video yesterday or day before yesterday of somebody walking through, like with a selfie video, walking through a line longer than you could imagine of people waiting in line at night on like a city street. And all of these people were waiting in line to have their eyeballs scanned, their retina scanned, and put into a database. All of these people were willingly waiting in line, not just now, I hate waiting in lines. I don't know about you, but I don't wait in lines for nothing. I'd much rather just pay more. I don't need to wait in line all night for Black Friday sale. I'll just pay more on the day before or whatever. These people are waiting in line to willingly let their eyeballs be scanned to go into some database that they don't know where it's going, what it's being used for, who's going to control it, in exchange for something called Worldcoin. Sam Altman, the founder of ChatGPT, released his much-anticipated crypto project. And the goal is simple for him, not so simple for me: a global financial and identity network based on proof of personhood, which is maybe part of what he's trying to do with the AI era. So he wants to prove that people are actually real people and not AI machines. Now, what's interesting about this is Andreas Antonopoulos, one of the OG like Bitcoin educators. He wrote a number of books, one of which is called, he actually wrote two books called The Internet of Money, Volume 1 and 2. Highly recommend you read them. They're like booklets. You can get them on Amazon. Highly recommend you read those. But he talked about how Bitcoin is borderless, permissionless, these things. But it's also personless, which is pretty interesting, right? A person can get a bank account. A machine cannot get a bank account. Right? And he talks about where you could have autonomous vehicles that could go around and drive an Uber route, for example, and they could get paid. But what he's trying to introduce, Sam Altman, with his Worldcoin is reintroduce personhood. Now, he made a cool, $250 million, no big deal, $250 million, creating this token. And then you got these eyeball scanning nodes that are being sent all over the world. And like I said, people are standing in line to do this, to have their eyeballs scanned. It's very murky and unclear exactly what he's trying to do. But what scares me about this is that in a world where we're continuing to lose more and more and more of our privacy, and we're seeing how that's being used against us, and we look no further than China, how willing people are to just go and just give that up for what? They don't even know what it's for. They've been told that if they do this, they're going to be given some free Worldcoin tokens that might be worth something. Now, what's interesting about this is that they can't do this in the U.S. In the United States, per the SEC's regulations, they're not allowed to just airdrop or give tokens away. So now we have all these people in the United States standing in line to get their eyeballs scanned, and they can't even get the tokens. So that's pretty scary. It scares me for the future of humanity when people think like that and haven't even really thought through or read the fine print to even know what they're doing, giving up all of their privacy in exchange for something they can't even get. Pretty scary. Now, in order to do this, you have to visit one of what they call an orb. You get your retina scanned. Like I said, there's 150 orbs in 35 different cities all around the world. Creates this personhood, and supposedly, it verifies that you're human, but it keeps your identity private. And they keep it private. Do they know though? Do they just promise not to tell anybody? We probably don't know. It's proprietary. So that's pretty scary. They're calling it like a digital passport. So it seems like it's sort of like a play where they want to build the biggest database of IDs, digital IDs, and they could control it. Now in China, you're not allowed to have access to the internet unless you go through a facial recognition scan. So they want to know who everybody is on the internet. In case you say something mean about the government that they don't want, then they know exactly who said it. No more anonymous using anymore, and that's exactly what this is setting up. They don't want you to be an anonymous user anymore because they want there to be consequences if you say something. See, in China, they have freedom of speech just like the United States does. You can say whatever you want in China. You just might end up in a concentration camp and have your organs removed. You're free to say it, but you may not be free after you say it. Now, the U.S. is supposed to have freedom of speech. I say what I want freely, and I'm free after I say it. Of course, we're seeing that change right in front of us as well. We're going to get to more of that in a minute. Some things that have happened this last week to show how this has changed in the United States. But like I said, in China, you're not free after you say it. In China, they shame their citizens. They put them on blacklists. They put their faces all over billboards around town to show who that is. So this Worldcoin is taking a scary turn. And like I said, most importantly, I'm just scared for all the people that are going and standing in line because it just shows where we're at as a humanity heading down this path. The opposite of that is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is borderless, permissionless, trustless. Nobody needs my retina. Nobody knows who I am. Nobody needs an ID on me. And we can all trust. We don't have to trust it because it's open. We can all verify. Instead of trusting, we verify. Now, of course, as these things happen, as more and more things that the government do happen, they start to do the marketing for Bitcoin for us. I'm going to talk more about this in a little bit. Some very prominent people around the world have been getting their bank accounts shut down. They're being debanked. So what do? Well, if I'm kicked out of the financial system, what do I do? Well, I'm not going to die. I need somewhere else to put my value. Well, Bitcoin seems like a good alternative. And so while a lot of people who think, well, why do we need something like Bitcoin? Well, they're certainly finding out very, very quickly right now. And while that's doing, of course, Bitcoin has been the best performing asset of 2023. It's obviously been the best performing asset since 2010. It's also the best performing asset of 2023. And more people buying it. Of course, now the evil empire BlackRock, quasi-semi-partner of the government, has now decided to jump into Bitcoin, and now they're trying to open up an ETF. We'll see if they get that through. But there's 3 analysts from BlackRock that put out a report this last week talking what they think the perfect portfolio allocation would be. Now, historically, for like about the last 50 years, your financial advisor has most likely told you that you should have a 60-40 bond to stock portfolio. 60% stocks, 40% bonds. And having that allocation would be the perfect portfolio for your, 40-year savings, retirement, et cetera. But these BlackRock analysts have now gone in to see if that's still correct. And as a matter of fact, they came out with something totally different. And as a matter of fact, it's so different that you're probably not going to believe me. So I hope that you go to Google and fact check me on this. But you can find the report the BlackRock analyst wrote, and you can see all the data that they have there. And what they said is that the perfect portfolio would be only 6% in bonds, 6.04% to be exact, 9.06% in stocks, and 84.9% in Bitcoin. Wow. What? BlackRock? They have more assets under management than anybody? Their business is investing your money in stocks for you. Their analyst said that you should only have a 9% allocation to stocks, a 6% allocation to bonds, and an 85% allocation to Bitcoin. That's what they said. Now, Bitcoin's averaged a 200% compounded annual growth rate. They said now it's down to about 150% compounded annual growth rate, but compared to stocks, about 6%. So would you rather have 6% or 150%? I think the answer is pretty clear. And so that's why BlackRock had to come out and say that. And so maybe that makes you think a little bit differently about it. Of course, I love Bitcoin. That's why I talk about it. I've also used real estate to help me build my wealth over the years. Real estate's been really good, and I've been working with a company called Rad Diversified, which really democratizes investing into real estate. I've talked about the CEO, Dutch Mendenhall. He's the co-founder and the CEO of Rad Diversified. He's also the president of the Alternative Investment Association. And he wrote a new book, and it's called Money Shackles. And these money shackles are basically like ideas that financially hold us back, things that you've been taught that you repeat, like go to school, get in debt, buy a car, get in more debt, things like that. And he thinks that those things are wrong. And in this book, he gives you his exact strategies to use debt to your advantage and then to tap into the lucrative alternative investment vehicles to redefine your American dream. And he shows you exactly how he did it and exactly how you can do the exact same thing. Now, Dutch, he's on a mission to be, at the forefront and really help usher in this massive financial change in American history by looking beyond Wall Street and be part of the super rich, right? The old American dream is dying fast, but you can get in the new American dream if you read Money Shackles. You can learn more at therad.com. That's THERAD.com, therad.com. Check out the book, Money Shackles, therad.com. All right, welcome back. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Mark Moss Show. Of course, we're talking about the decentralized revolution, right? We're talking about it each and every week, and we're running through some of the latest breaking news headlines to show you just how far things are progressing, how fast they're going. And, it's sort of like sometimes you have like this chicken or the egg situation where was this created as a solution to that problem, or is this causing the devolution of the problem? And so, when I think about Bitcoin specifically, I think about it in terms of that. And, for the last 6-7 years that I've been publicly talking about it, specifically in the United States, and maybe, Western world, Canada, Europe, etc., I get asked all the time, like, why? Why do we need something like Bitcoin? Why do we need that? Why do we need decentralized technologies and things like that? When you talk to people in third world countries or very harsh authoritarian regimes, they don't ask those questions. So if you live in Turkey or Venezuela or Argentina or Lebanon or any of these countries where you're seeing double to triple digit inflation, you don't have to be told why you should need another currency. They already know. They're trying to get out of that currency as fast as they can, which is why those countries impose capital controls to force them in. If you live in North Korea or China where your transactions are censored and you can only buy what they tell you can buy, you don't have to be told why you need a currency that nobody can control. You already want that. Only if you live in the United States or Canada or Western Europe do you ask a question like that. And you would only ask that question if you have absolutely no idea what the heck the rest of the world is like, because you've never traveled and you've never paid attention. So you're in New York City in Manhattan sipping a $20 cocktail. What do we need different money for? Our money works fine. Well, it works fine for you. For the majority of the world, it doesn't. Okay? But it's almost like the governments in the Western world now want to tell us why we need something like Bitcoin. I hosted a Twitter Spaces call with presidential candidate RFK Jr. this week, and he was asked on the call, what was it that brought you to take another look at Bitcoin? And he said it was the the Canadian trucker protest. When I saw Canadians practicing their constitutional rights to peaceful, law-abiding protest, peaceful protest, he said, out there singing songs and picking up trash and feeding the poor and doing all these things, and they were demonized and their money, their bank accounts were shut down, I knew at that moment we needed something else. And so he, as well as millions of other people, were brought to this realization oh shoot, we do need a different money that the governments can't control. So maybe that wasn't your point, but don't worry, the government's going to do their best to get you warmed up very quickly. And of course, we see more of that happening today. Just this week, we saw two very prominent people known globally who found front and center why they need a different money. One of which is Nigel Farage. You might know Nigel Farage. He served in the UK Parliament. He was instrumental in the Brexit situation, which a lot of people in the UK have different opinions of Nigel Farage. Depending on, which side of the political aisle you're on. I can tell you, not that I'm an expert in Brexit or what happened there. However, it's clearly the UK wanting to be part of the EU, which is a globalist, and then the UK wanting to leave the EU, which would be then decentralization. And so I believe that Brexit and Donald Trump being elected were signposts of this decentralized revolution I talk about. That being said, I did get a chance to meet Nigel Farage and talk to him quite a bit. We spoke at the same conference, Nomad Capitalist Live in Mexico City last year. And I got to hang out with Nigel. We went outside, he had a cigarette, and we sat and chatted for about 30, 40 minutes. internets. And I can tell you, like, he's pretty based. Like, he understands the threat of globalism very well. He understands the threat of the global banking cartel. He understands the threat of this entire globalist agenda, and he has fought against that. So it should come as no surprise that, of course, they don't like him. And they want to use every tool in their ability to get rid of him, including censoring him on the internet, smearing him, and destroying his character. And the latest one is that he has now been unbanked. What does that mean? That means he is kicked out of the banking system. That means he was notified that his accounts will all be closed without warning. Your accounts are closed, and you can't have a bank account anymore. What do you do if you can't have a bank account? Well, exactly. You don't do a lot. And so, he's been talking about this, and a lot of people are like, Bitcoin, Bitcoin, Bitcoin. But this is happening. And so now the whole world, and even if you don't like Nigel Farage, even if you do not like him, you still see what happened to him, and you go, shoot, if they can do it to him, they can probably do it to me. We also had another one, another globally recognized figure, a personal friend of mine as well. I'm talking about Dr. Joseph Mercola. Dr. Joseph Mercola is one of the most famous, naturopathic, holistic doctors in the world. He's been creating content forever, helping millions and millions of people through their health problems. And during the COVID pandemic, he became enemy number one of the COVID industrial complex because he talked about ways that you could build up your immune system, ways that you could, alleviate the symptoms and things like that, which they didn't want. Imagine that. Imagine them not wanting people to be healthy. Interesting. He became enemy number one. Like I said, he's a personal friend of mine. He's spoken at, I have my own conferences called the Market Disruptors Live. He spoke at both of those. And not only has he become enemy number one, he was named by CNN as the number one source of disinformation. So now he's spreading lies and spreading hate and all these things, and now they've come after him. So he also got debanked. As a matter of fact, he received notice from JP Morgan Chase that all his accounts were going to be closed. And not just all his accounts, but everybody that works for him, and even the people that work for them's kids. So we're not just, it's like those movies, where it's like, I'm going to get revenge on you. I'm going to kill you and everybody you know and love, right? And then the hero's like, well, okay, fine, I'll do whatever you say. That's what they did to Mercola. They didn't just go kill his bank account. They killed the bank account for other people he know and loved. So people watching this are like, shoot, this is getting pretty crazy. This isn't just North Korea here. This isn't just China. This is the UK. This is America, where there's supposed to be a rule of law. What happened to the rule of law? Well, the rule of law has been thrown in the toilet paper, turned into toilet paper. In the Nazi regime in Germany, they did something similar. They passed a number of laws that restricted the rights of a certain class of people they didn't like, the Jews. They passed all kinds. These laws stripped Jews of their citizenships and prohibited them from marrying non-Jews. And so they took a group of people they didn't want. They created laws in a way to go after them, to persecute them, to strip them of their citizenship, and even prevent them from marrying. What's so different about what's going on today? The UK, the EU Parliament doesn't like Nigel Farage talking about how the EU is corrupt and needs to be shut down. The COVID industrial complex doesn't like Joseph Mercola talking about ways that you can take vitamin D to build up your own natural immunity. And so they smear you. They censor you first. Remember, he was named number one disinformation. They smear you first, or they censor you first, then they smear you, discredit you, and then they just assassinate you. In this case, debanked. And so, like I said, at a point where the developed world mostly wants to know, why do we need something like Bitcoin? It's coming front and center. And we're really starting to see that there's very, very, very blatant two-tier system. At the same time, this week we've seen Hunter Biden try to get this plea deal. He's facing some serious allegations that could be even punishable by death. I mean, we're talking treason here. And they tried to pass this sweetheart deal where they said, hey, he'll plead guilty to this. And the judge said, wait a minute, does this give him immunity of any potential future things we bring against him? And the prosecutor said, yeah. And the judge says, has this ever been done before? And the prosecutor said, no. And the judge says, like, no deal. But you can see this dual arm of the law, and it's bringing front and center why we need something like Bitcoin. When I say signpost, what I mean by that is that a lot of times people want to know where things are going, and then they want to know when. And the when problem is always the question. Because as Warren Buffett said, I believe it was him, he said that markets can stay irrational longer than people can stay solvent. And so while we see what's going on and we understand where it's leading us to and what the inevitable outcome of this is, we just don't know how long that time frame is. And so I call them signposts because if I was going to give you directions to my house, but you've never been to my house, and you don't know if I live near you or on the other side of the country. And I said, drive down the highway till you see this sign and go right, and drive to the end of this fence and go left. And when you see this sign, go right. And, there's 10 or 15 turns there. But you don't know if that's going to take you 1 hour or 15 hours, right? And so because you don't know how long it's going to take you, you would just be following the signs. But you would know, if there was 15 turns or 15 signs, as you get down to the 12th and the 13th and the 14th, you would know you're getting closer. Now, that last sign, that 15th sign, could be a long distance between it. So you don't know exactly when, but you know you're getting closer. And that's exactly what we're looking at. These are signposts that show us where we're going. It shows us the direction. And as investors, as humans, we want to know the direction of where we're going, especially as investors, because we're not trying to trade in and out of all of these individual news stories, but rather we're trying to position ourselves and be in the right direction. And so that's important to understand it from that perspective. And one of the things that we're looking at constantly to figure out what the direction is we're going is we're watching the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, of course, controls the monetary policy in the United States, and they cause all the booms and busts that we have. They were created, they told us they were created in order to prevent the market booms and busts from happening. They were created, supposedly, they told us, to smooth out the market cycles because the markets are too volatile and we shouldn't have these booms and busts. And so if you allow us to control money, then we can smooth this out. However, the opposite is true. And as a matter of fact, if I could show you a chart right now, you would see that since the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, the booms and busts only get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And each one has gotten bigger and faster and worse. And so they increase the money supply, and then things boom and things take off good, and then they decrease the money supply and everyone goes bankrupt. And they do it over and over and over again. And they do that by adjusting the price of money. Now, most people realize that setting the prices of goods and services doesn't work. It's been tried numerous times throughout history, and it's always failed every single time. If I say that you can't sell bread for more than $2, but it costs you more than $2 to make bread, then what happens? Well, two things. One, we have shortages. No one's making bread. Two, we have a black market. People sell bread on the black market for whatever the price needs to be paid. So we understand we can't set prices for goods, but when the Fed sets the price of money, they're setting the price of all the goods. And you set the price of money by the interest rate. So if I want to buy $1 million house, I don't have $1 million, so I need to go buy the money. I need to buy the $1 million. How much does it cost me to buy $1 million? Well, today it costs me about 7%. That's the interest rate, right? So when they lower the price of money, take interest rates to zero, people borrow a lot of money. When they increase it, people borrow less. And so we've just seen the Federal Reserve go back onto the warpath, raising interest rates. Now, it's interesting that they did this for a couple of reasons. First of all, last month, the Fed decided to pause. Now, they didn't call it a pause. They called it a skip. We haven't really heard that terminology before. But when you look through the history of the Fed raising and lowering rates, they do this all the time. When you look through the history, we've never seen a point where they lowered rates, held them low, which they did, and then raised them, and then paused and started raising again. We haven't seen it before. It's always been they lower them, things get too hot, so then start raising them, and then they raise too hot, they start crushing everything, and then they start lowering again. So they go back and forth. It's more like a light switch. We're up or we're down. We're up or we're down. We're up or we're down. Maybe we take a pause before we go down, but we don't go up, pause, and then keep going up again. At least not in history, and yet we have. So we're seeing some firsts here. That's why history rhymes. It doesn't always repeat. But here we are raising rates again. We can see that we are now raising the benchmark borrowing cost to the highest level in more than 22 years. As a matter of fact, we haven't seen this level since before the 2008 financial crash. So not a good sign. We can see this quarter percentage point increase bring the Fed fund rate to 5.25 to 5.5%. And they indicated at the June meeting that 2 rate hikes are coming this year. So more should be coming. Interesting. Now, the Fed has a target of having 2% inflation, which they overshot. They couldn't get to 2%, so they overshot it. We ended up at 9.1%. Oops, it's a little bit too high. Now they're trying to bring it back down to 2%. They still have a long way to go. But what do you think the odds are that they land exactly on the number? Well, if you guessed 0, you'd probably be pretty close to right. And it's an interesting time because at the time that we're seeing this happening, the Fed's watching the CPI, Consumer Price Index. They're also watching other numbers and indexes as well to see what's happening. But what's interesting is when you look at the CPI basket, the only thing that was coming down in the CPI basket was energy. Everything else is staying up. Energy has come down. Now, why has energy come down? I'm talking about oil, gas, natural gas, etc. It's come down because of 2 reasons. It's always supply and demand, but it's a little bit more complex than that. You had the Russia-Ukraine situation, which everybody expected sanctions to happen, and they expected all the Russian supply of energy to fall off the market. So it would cause a massive shortage in supply, which would push prices up. So prices shot up to the moon is what happened. And then when they realized that, well, the U.S. sanctions actually failed, as a matter of fact, the U.S. sanctions backfired. As a matter of fact, Russia still has all the same energy going to the world that they did before, and there's no supply shortage at all. The prices crashed or just went back down to where they were. You see, they shot way higher in anticipation of a shortage because the shortage didn't happen or materialize. They just came back down. So they crashed back down. So that's why prices of energy have crashed so much. And that's where this deflation or this disinflation in the CPI basket has come from. However, I believe that's about to change. We're starting to see now energy prices are starting to go back higher. So they went too far, and now they're readjusting. And I believe moving into the rest of this year, we're going to continue to see an increase in the energy prices, and that will be a problem for the Fed as inflation continues to go back higher. So we'll see how that plays out. I'll keep you here with the play-by-play. I've been very vocal saying that I think this is some of the lowest inflation that we'll see for the rest of the decade. We are not at the bottom. We're maybe at the bottom of this cycle. So when you look back through history, 1970s, 1940s, when inflation really was rampant, it comes in waves, right? Nothing ever goes up and down in a straight line. And so that's what we expect to see. Look for it in waves. Breitbart, their economist, says that we're probably looking at a double dip of inflation, and it's on its way. And so he said that he's expecting, we're talking about Breitbart economics editor John Carney told Fox that he's expecting another explosion because of the rising price of oil and shelter, which is exactly what I'm saying. So I think that's going to be interesting. We'll have to watch that. And we also saw that as the Fed has raised rates at this level, they haven't just crushed people like you and I. They've also crushed the government, the U.S. Treasury, because the U.S. Treasury has now $32 trillion of debt. And so now the interest rate has gone up on that debt. And the U.S. is now paying $970 billion, basically $1 trillion just in the interest alone. Just in the interest alone. It's insane. As a matter of fact, we have now surpassed, the interest payments have surpassed the amount of money spent on the military, which is pretty incredible considering that the U.S. spends more money on its military than the next 10 countries combined. More than China, more than Russia, more than every other, more than the next 10 countries combined. And now we're spending more on the interest. It's not good. It's definitely not good. And we're seeing the impacts of this all around the economy. Defaults are on the rise. Corporate bankruptcies are expecting to blow up. And so it'll be pretty interesting to see how this all plays out. Now, this is the game they create in their financial markets. If you want to protect yourself from their games in their financial markets, then you can get out of the financial markets. And the best way to do that for thousands of years has been by buying gold. J.P. Morgan famously said that gold is money, everything else is credit. And he's right. We're in a credit-based, a debt-based monetary system. Now, a lot of people want to know where I get my gold. I like to work with a company called Universal Coin and Bullion. I trust them in a world where it's hard to know who to trust, especially with gold because you can't verify it. And I trust them because I've worked directly with the president, Mike Fulgens. He wrote the consumer alert on gold coins for the Texas Attorney General. And they have great prices. And as a matter of fact, they have great prices for my listeners. You can get a 1 ounce Gold American Eagle coin. It's the most popular gold bullion coin in the world, and he's going to give it to you at his dealer cost and even give you free shipping if you mention my name. And he'll even send you his 30-page national award-winning gold guide, absolutely free if you mention me. Call 1-800-UCB-GOLD. Again, 1-800-UCB-GOLD. Or you can go online to universalcoin.com/Mark Moss. Again, universalcoin.com/Mark Moss. If you call him, tell him Mark Moss sent you. They'll send you all that for free and give you that special dealer cost. Dollar's been the reserve currency of the world officially since 1944. Unofficially, that changed in about 1971 when President Richard Nixon kind of broke that agreement. And it's important to understand what those dates are. And actually, let me go back a little bit further. The U.S. took over from the pound sterling in about 1913. Then we had the creation of the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. If you add that up, that's about 30-ish years. Then 1944, we had a new monetary system that was created, 1944. And then 1971, Richard Nixon broke that agreement. So the dollar was supposed to be backed by gold. All the currencies of the world would be backed by the dollar, pegged to the dollar. But he ended that. In 1971, the dollar was no longer backed by gold. 1944 to 1971, if you do the math, it's about 30 years. Then we've been on a fiat money system since 1971. That is a completely unbacked, completely free-floating currency basket of paper dollars, where each country now has their own free-floating currencies and we trade against each other. So it's important to understand that because fiat currencies, monetary systems tend to last about 30-ish years. We're now about 50 years into this, and yes, the monetary system is changing, again, right here in front of us. We know that Russia and China have both been on a de-dollarization plan for over a decade. They've been trying to move away from the dollar, changing their reserve. Instead of storing all their wealth in treasuries, they've been buying other things, commodities, things like that. Of course, this was really escalated when Russia had their bank accounts seized after the Ukraine invasion. And now we see the rise of the BRICS that want to rise up and create their own currency and challenge the dollar. The BRICS stand for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It's a coalition of nations that get together, but we've seen more and more countries joining these BRICS nations. And we're seeing that these BRICS nations are not to be discounted. As a matter of fact, collectively, they play a major economic role in the world, and not just a major economic role, they also produce most of the commodities in the world. Now, the United States does really well. We produce a lot of goods and services. We have a lot of GDP. We produce a lot of social media services, and we produce a lot of financial services, but we don't produce a lot of the actual physical commodities that the world needs. Even Vladimir Putin called out the United States, said, what are you going to do? You're going to eat your social media stocks? The world can't eat social media stocks. The world, turns out, needs things like fertilizer and corn and wheat and base metals like gold and silver and copper and things like rare earth elements to make electronics and things like that. And the BRICS nations produce those. Now, what we can see is that these BRICS nations, they don't want to be under the thumb of this dollar system anymore, and so they've been working on creating their own global currency. Now, this is coming to a head pretty quickly. We'll see what's happening. But just this month, July 23rd, they had a big 2023 BRICS Summit. And we saw top national security officials and diplomats from all these BRICS nations gathered in South Africa for a 3-day meeting to really dig in deep to see exactly how all this is going to work, what their hot spot issues are, what's going on with Russia, Ukraine, global security, all of these things in preparation for what's coming next month. And what's coming next month is, I believe, August 22nd, they're supposed to be announcing the new BRICS currency. And this is a pretty big deal. What are the odds that it actually takes off? Boy, maybe I'm going to give it a less than 50% chance. I think it's very hard to get all of these countries to agree on anything, so we'll see. But I'm not saying it's a zero chance. But they're supposedly going to announce this August 22nd. We'll see what happens there. We have other major nations like Saudi Arabia, for example, joining that block of the BRICS. And if they start selling oil in these other BRICS currencies, that's going to really change the game. When the dollar left the gold standard in 1971, 1974, it moved to an oil standard. It's known as the petrodollar. But if that's lost, boy, the dollar could lose ground very, very, very quickly. So it's definitely something that we want to be watching for. Because, like I said, these coalitions are not small players; they're big, big players. Now, what they've proposed is to do a dollar, not a gold-backed currency, but a gold-referenced currency. So what that means is the pound sterling, right, which was the reserve currency of the world before the dollar, and is still the top 3 currency used in the world today. So it's been around a long time, but the pound sterling. So the pound was a reference to how much silver, sterling silver, how much weight. So that was supposed to equal a pound of sterling silver. And so that's what they're trying to do with this gold-backed currency. It's not backed by gold, meaning it used to be where you could go exchange dollars for gold. The dollar was a IOU for the gold in the bank, and so anytime I could take the IOU and go get the gold, right? But a referenced is different. It's not backed by it. You can't go exchange it for it, but it would be equal to a certain measurement of gold. We don't know what that is yet, so we'll see. But potentially, like this new currency, this new BRICS currency, we call it a brick. A brick could be worth, say, 1/10 of an ounce of gold. And if gold's $2,000 roughly today, 1/10 would be worth $200. So now one brick would be equal $200, right? You get the idea. It could be a gram, it could be whatever. Now, what would be interesting about that is then that gives all of these countries a neutral currency that's based off of really an asset that nobody controls. Now, we've seen Russia, we've seen China adding more gold, and really all central banks around the world have added more gold than any time in history, potentially in preparation for this. Not to launch a gold-backed currency, China and Russia have almost a zero chance of actually having a reserve currency of the world. I don't think they're able to do it, nor do they want to do it for any number of reasons, including they don't have open capital markets. 2, they don't have the trust. 3, they don't have the credit markets. They don't have the bond markets to invest that money into. And then 4, they don't want it because of something known as Triffin's dilemma, which is that the nation that has the world reserve currency of the world is forced to export dollars in order to supply the world with that currency, which is what the U.S. has done, which is why we've hollowed out the entire middle class. So I don't think that's going to happen. But what would be interesting is that right now it looks like all the currencies of the world are falling next to the dollar. The dollar is the king currency. It's the strongest. But we potentially could see the dollar losing value to the BRICS currency because the BRICS would be tied to gold. And what happens is that's sort of like a snowball effect or self-fulfilling prophecy, where as that happens, then people want to start dumping dollars to buy the new currency. It's also known as Gresham's Law, which is good money drives out bad. And so people would be wanting to get rid of the weaker currencies to buy the stronger currencies, which only accelerates the entire plan, the entire situation. So this is expected to happen August 22nd. It's why central banks are buying lots of gold. Might not be a bad idea to buy some gold just in case, but certainly, like I said, it will be interesting to watch how this plays out. But the odds of, like I said, all of these nations really getting together and agreeing, I'm still having my doubts about that. The United States, which is supposedly 50 United States, can't even agree. I mean, we have in the United States, we have states suing, the federal government or passing laws to prevent the U.S. from putting like a CBDC in, for example. So like in North Carolina, in Florida, in Texas, they're passing legislation to prevent that. And these are 50 independent states of Americans. How do 50 independent nations agree to do this? That's going to be difficult. We know that Vladimir Putin can't, from Russia, which is the R in the BRICS, can't even go to the S in the BRICS, which is South Africa, because of fear of being arrested. So how can, arguably 2 of the bigger leaders in this BRICS coalition, they can't even visit each other because of their fear of being arrested? Like, how does that work? And I think that's going to be a big problem. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Mark Moss Show. We're talking about the decentralized revolution. I'm giving you the latest breaking news, which is the signpost that show this is happening. Hopefully that makes sense. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Hit me up on social media at @OneMarkMoss. Let me know you're listening. Give me a review on this show on your favorite podcast player. If you could please do that, I'd appreciate it. And that's what I got. Thanks so much for listening.